Happy Halloween, everyone! And guess what? It's time for another Saw movie. But, not just any Saw movie. This is Saw VII 3D, the final chapter. The end begins. Return of the King, Revenge of the Sith. Whatever. Yeah, right. I gotta preface this by saying, I have seen pretty much every Saw film in the theaters. And it started out as genuine excitement after seeing the very first teaser trailer, which asked the most intriguing question. So now we have the proclaimed final chapter in the Saw series, and after Saw 6, I was actually really excited to see how they wrap this thing up. I thought that Saw 6 kind of put it back on the right track after an awful, awful Saw 5, and they started to kind of see the light at the end of the tunnel. So Saw 7 begins with about 3 different storylines from 3 different timelines, reintroducing you to characters you've probably forgotten about, and then of course we get to our first big trap. And it's the best part of this movie, and it got me really excited because it's something we haven't seen before, and it could have taken it in a totally new direction, really cool, a public trap. It takes place in a really busy plaza with tons of people looking in on 3 people trapped in a box, and I, first of all, hadn't seen so much sunlight in a Saw movie before, and it was kind of interesting, and your mind starts to go, and you think like, man, there's so many possibilities, they can finally open this up to a much bigger world. You know, the Saw movies always feel kind of really small and contained. It's like it involves 6 or 7 people trapped somewhere. And it seemed like they were getting out of the dingy basements and finally taking us somewhere interesting. Help us! But then the trap happens and it's back to business as usual in some poorly lit, unkempt warehouse. Now the structure of Saw 3D is probably closest to Saw 3 or Saw 6, where it basically involves one man having to move through a series of traps, saving people that he knows. But the difference is that a lot of the traps in this one are just very basic. And I think maybe the idea is that this new killer isn't as inventive as Jigsaw, and so all he can do is make traps that poke people with stuff. I don't know. But, to that end, it does up the gore factor, and this has to be easily, by far, the goriest Saw film that we have ever seen, and that is saying a lot. Everything happens on screen. Nothing is implied in this film. It is right in your face, and they're going to show you everything that happens from start to end. You get to see pretty much every trap happen from start to finish. And the sound design alone is pretty intense. There is one scene where you're just like, stop pulling on the fishhook! Gah! And you'll know when you see it. The 3D in this movie is pretty useless, except to have a little bit of blood and maybe some intestines thrown in your general direction. But the problem with 3D is it stops at the screen. It's not like things are coming at you. They're just kind of, you know, and it stops. The only thing that it's kind of good for is that there are moments where they like put you in the trap. So it's like you're sitting there and you're like, huh, yep, this would be a really bad trap. I'm glad I'm not in it. You know, and then they get their eyes poked out. The story this time around involves a guy who pretends that he escaped a Jigsaw trap just so he can write a book and become famous. And he expected to get away with that. How? Come on. Now the main villain is still this lame guy named Hoffman, and Tobin Bell, Jigsaw, still dead for like the past 4 movies. And the problem is that this guy, Hoffman, is never going to be as interesting or compelling as Jigsaw was, just because he's insane. And he has no moral compass whatsoever, and there's just nothing interesting about that. And I've said it before, I will say it again, they should have never killed off Tobin Bell in the 3rd movie, completely short-sighted, and because of that, all they're doing is reliving the same couple days over and over, but trying to figure out ways to go back and like add a character to a scene that we didn't see, and then all of a sudden there's a new accomplice. Of course, the biggest character to return in this movie is Dr. Gordon, Carrie Elways, being as incredibly cheesy as ever. He even has a slow clap in this movie, and it is so awesome. It is great. He is the epitome of terrible acting in Saw movies, and I freaking love it. Stop the lie! You're a liar! And this movie is littered with terrible performances. It's so great. I mean, it's a hallmark of these movies. But just watch. The female officer whose only job it is to answer phones and type on the computer. She's the best. There's a moment where she's on the phone, and her partner on the other line is just getting murdered by a machine gun. And she's like, Bobby? Bobby, are you there? Bobby, are you there? Dude just got fucking murdered, come on! In the end, I think I was expecting something a little bit bigger, especially when they introduced that public trap and all the possibilities that could have been rendered from it. Could have been great. Instead, despite all the gore, Saw 7 just kind of limps the franchise to a finish and abandons a lot of the elements that made the first couple ones successful.